April 15th, 1912, 2:37 a.m., North Atlantic Ocean. Water temperature, 28 degrees Fahrenheit. RMS Titanic breaks in half. Steel screams. Rivets explode like gunfire. 1,500 people hit the water. Most die in 15 minutes. Hypothermia shuts down the body. Heart stops, lungs freeze. The ship that couldn't sink, gone in 2 hours, 40 minutes. But here's what they don't tell you. 3 years before the wreck, insurance adjusters flagged the Olympic-class ships as high risk. Underwriters refused full coverage. White Star Line needed money, desperately. They were bleeding cash. The Olympic, Titanic's identical sister ship, had already crashed twice in 6 months. Repairs cost a fortune. Insurance companies were getting suspicious. So White Star Line insured the Titanic for $2.5 million. That's $75 million in today's money. And then the unsinkable ship hit an iceberg on its maiden voyage and sank. Convenient. Too convenient. Look, I know what you're thinking. Iceberg. Done. Simple explanation. Move on. But stay with me here because the physical evidence doesn't match the story they sold us. The wreck sits 12,500 feet down. Ocean pressure at that depth crushes everything. But when Robert Ballard found the Titanic in 1985, something was wrong. The hull damage didn't look right. The tear wasn't a long gash like you'd expect from an iceberg. It was a series of separated openings, almost surgical. And the rivets that held the hull together, weren't sheared by ice impact. They were corroded, weakened, like they'd been compromised before the ship even left port. What really happened that night in the Atlantic? And why were so many powerful people supposed to be on that ship, but canceled at the last minute? So, here's the official story we've all heard 1,000 times. Titanic, biggest ship ever built. 52,000 tons of British engineering, 9 decks, 16 watertight compartments. Thomas Andrews designed her, said she could stay afloat with 4 compartments flooded, maybe 5. The White Star Line called her unsinkable in their marketing materials. April 10th, 1912, Southampton, England, noon. Titanic leaves port. First stop, Cherbourg, France. Then Queenstown, Ireland. Final destination, New York City. Captain Edward Smith commanding, 59 years old, 32 years experience. White Star Line's most senior captain. This was supposed to be his last voyage before retirement. April 14th, 11:39 p.m. Lookout Frederick Fleet spots something ahead. Ice. He rings the warning bell 3 times, grabs the telephone, calls the bridge. Iceberg right ahead. 6 seconds later, First Officer William Murdoch orders hard to starboard. The ship turns. Not fast enough. At 11:40 p.m., Titanic's starboard side scrapes the iceberg. Impact duration, less than 10 seconds. Passengers barely felt it. Thomas Andrews inspects the damage. Water flooding in. 5 compartments breached. 1 more than the ship could handle. He tells Captain Smith the ship has 1 hour, maybe 2. 2:20 a.m., last lifeboat leaves. Still over 1,500 people on board. Not enough lifeboats. White Star Line wanted more deck space for first-class passengers, so they installed 20 lifeboats instead of the 48 the ship could carry. At 2:37 a.m., the ship's back breaks. Bow section pulls the stern vertical. People slide off the deck, fall into the ocean. The stern stays vertical for maybe 30 seconds. Then it slips under. 2 hours, 40 minutes from iceberg to total sinking. The Carpathia arrives at 3:30 a.m., picks up 705 survivors from lifeboats. 1,512 people dead, frozen, drowned. Official inquiry blames Captain Smith for going too fast through ice warnings. Blames White Star Line for insufficient lifeboats. Calls it a tragic accident. Case closed. Except the numbers don't work. Let me ask you something. Put your answer in the comments because I'm genuinely curious what you think. If the Titanic was so unsinkable, if White Star Line believed their own marketing, why did J.P. Morgan cancel his trip at the last second? Think about it. J.P. Morgan owned the International Mercantile Marine Company. That company owned White Star Line. Morgan controlled the whole operation. The Titanic was his ship, his investment, his maiden voyage. He booked the most expensive suite, reserved it months in advance. Then 2 days before departure, he canceled, said he was ill, needed to stay in France. But here's the thing. Photographers spotted him in perfect health walking around France after the sinking. No illness, no emergency. Just changed his mind. And he wasn't the only one. Milton Hershey, the chocolate guy, canceled. George Vanderbilt canceled. Guglielmo Marconi, inventor of the wireless telegraph, was supposed to sail on Titanic. Took an earlier ship instead. 55 first-class passengers canceled in the final 48 hours before departure. 55. That's not normal. Most of them were rich, powerful, connected. Did they know something? Now let's talk about what happened before the ship even left port. March 20th, 1911. Just over a year before the Titanic sank. The Olympic, Titanic's sister ship, collides with HMS Hawke in the Solent. Both ships badly damaged. The Olympic limps back to Belfast for repairs. White Star Line files an insurance claim. Insurance company investigates, finds White Star Line at fault, refuses to pay. White Star Line loses hundreds of thousands of pounds. The repairs drain their cash reserves. September 19th, 1911, 6 months later. The Olympic throws a propeller blade in the middle of the Atlantic. Has to return to Belfast again. More repairs, more costs, more losses. By early 1912, White Star Line is hemorrhaging money. The Olympic is a liability. Repair costs mounting, insurance companies watching closely. And then suddenly the Titanic, the Olympic's identical twin, sets sail on its maiden voyage. Fully insured. Crashes into an iceberg. Sinks. Insurance pays out $2.5 million. Convenient timing. But here's where it gets interesting. Some researchers started comparing photographs of the Olympic and Titanic, looking closely at the hull markings, the portholes, the deck configurations. They found discrepancies. The Titanic was supposed to have evenly spaced portholes on the forward sea deck. 16 portholes, even spacing. But photographs of the ship leaving Southampton show 14 portholes. Uneven spacing, just like the Olympic. The Titanic's wheelhouse was supposed to be flush with the deck, but in departure photos, there's a gap, a raised lip. Just like the Olympic after her repairs. So here's the theory that makes insurance investigators nervous. What if they switched the ships? What if the damaged Olympic was disguised as the Titanic? What if White Star Line deliberately sank their crippled ship to collect insurance money? Sounds crazy, right? But the physical evidence keeps piling up. Let's go back to Belfast. Harland and Wolff Shipyard. Winter of 1911 to 1912. Both ships are in dry dock. The Olympic getting repaired after her collision. the Titanic being finished for her maiden voyage. They're sitting side by side, identical twins, same size, same design, same everything. Here's what we know happened. The Olympic's repairs took longer than expected, much longer. She was supposed to be back in service by December. Didn't happen. Still in Belfast in January. Still there in February. Meanwhile, the Titanic's launch date kept getting pushed back. Originally scheduled for March 20th. Delayed to April 10th. 3 weeks late. White Star Line said they needed more time for finishing touches, but workers at Harland and Wolff told a different story. James Fenton, deckhand, worked on both ships. He wrote a letter to his wife on March 11th, 1912, 1 month before the Titanic sailed. In that letter, he said something strange. They're not finishing the Titanic. They're cannibalizing parts of her to fix the Olympic. The letter survived. It's in the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum in Belfast. You can see it yourself. Fenton described watching workers remove fixtures from one ship and install them on the other, switching nameplates, moving furniture, swapping carpet. He thought it was odd, but figured the company knew what they were doing. 3 other workers gave similar testimonies decades later. John Hume, Robert Hitchens, Thomas Dillon. All described unusual activity around both ships in the final weeks before departure. Equipment being moved at night. Extra security. Orders not to talk about what they saw. Most of those workers died in the sinking. Convenient. But one detail keeps coming up in survivor testimonies. Multiple passengers said the ship that left Southampton didn't feel new. Paint peeling in places, rust spots on the deck railings, loose fittings in the cabins. Margaret Brown, the unsinkable Molly Brown, wrote in her diary that her first-class suite had scuff marks on the furniture. Worn carpet. She complained to the steward. He said the ship had been in service for a while, and this was normal wear and tear. But this was supposed to be the maiden voyage. Brand new ship. How does a brand new ship have wear and tear? Unless it wasn't new. Unless it was the Olympic. Now let's talk about the coal fire. Oh, you didn't know about the coal fire. That's because it's buried in the official inquiry testimony. Page 217. Easy to miss. Here's what happened. Before the Titanic left Southampton, a fire started in coal bunker number 6, starboard side, near the boiler rooms. Coal spontaneously combusts sometimes when stored in huge piles. The heat builds up, starts smoldering. Normal procedure. Put out the fire before sailing. Delay departure if necessary. But White Star Line didn't delay. They sailed with the fire still burning. Why? Because the ship was already 3 weeks behind schedule. Delaying again would cost money, would spook investors, would give insurance companies another reason to ask questions. So they sailed with a coal fire burning in bunker number 6. Fireman John Dilley testified at the inquiry. He worked in the boiler rooms. He said the fire burned for 3 weeks. Started in Belfast before departure. Crew tried to put it out. Couldn't. Too much coal. Too deep in the pile. The fire got so hot, it warped the steel bulkhead between the coal bunker and the hull. Weakened the metal. Made it brittle. And where was bunker number 6 located? Right where the iceberg supposedly struck. Right where the hull tore open. Dilley said the fire damaged the structural integrity of that section, made the steel fragile. So when the iceberg scraped the side, even a glancing blow, the weakened hull couldn't take it, crumpled like aluminum foil. But here's the question nobody asked. If White Star Line knew about the fire, and they did, it's in the testimony, why did they hide it from passengers? Why did they let people board a ship with a raging coal fire? Unless the fire was part of the plan, unless they needed an excuse for why the hull would fail so catastrophically from a minor impact. And speaking of the impact, let's talk about what the lookouts saw, or rather, what they couldn't see. Frederick Fleet, lookout in the crow's nest, the guy who spotted the iceberg and rang the warning bell. He testified that he should have seen the iceberg sooner, much sooner. Why didn't he?
Because someone took the binoculars. I'm not making this up. It's in the official record. The lookouts were supposed to have binoculars in the crow's nest. Standard equipment. Every ship carried them. On a clear night with binoculars, you can spot an iceberg from miles away. Plenty of time to turn. But when Fleet climbed into the crow's nest that night, the binoculars were gone. Missing. Nobody knew where they were. Fleet testified he asked for them multiple times during the voyage, kept getting told they'd be delivered. Never happened. So he and Reginald Lee, the other lookout, had to scan the horizon with their naked eyes, on a moonless night, in iceberg territory. No binoculars. Fleet said if he'd had binoculars, he would have spotted the iceberg in time. The ship would have avoided it completely. So where were the binoculars? Turned out they were locked in a cabinet. Second Officer David Blair had the key. But Blair got reassigned off the Titanic at the last minute in Southampton. White Star Line shuffled the officer roster, moved people around. Blair left the ship in a hurry, and he forgot to hand over the key. The binoculars stayed locked in the cabinet. The lookouts sailed blind. Now, maybe that's just bad luck. Maybe it's incompetence. Officers get reassigned, keys get lost, things happen. But combined with everything else? The switched ships theory, the coal fire, the wealthy passengers canceling, J.P. Morgan's convenient illness. The missing binoculars start looking less like an accident. Start looking more like sabotage. Let me show you something else that doesn't add up. The ship's course that night. Captain Smith received 6 separate ice warnings throughout the day on April 14th. 6 different ships radioed the Titanic, told them there was heavy ice ahead, gave specific coordinates. Standard procedure: slow down, post extra lookouts, change course to avoid the ice field. Captain Smith did none of those things. He maintained full speed, 22.5 knots, just shy of the ship's maximum speed. Didn't post extra lookouts, didn't alter course. Why? The official inquiry said Smith was overconfident, believed his ship could handle anything. Tragic hubris. But Smith had 32 years' experience. He'd sailed the North Atlantic route dozens of times. He knew the dangers of ice. He'd navigated ice fields before. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't stupid. So why did he ignore 6 separate warnings and charge full speed into a known ice field on a moonless night with no binoculars for the lookouts? Unless he had orders. Unless someone told him to maintain speed no matter what. And here's the thing. The White Star Line had a policy, an unofficial policy that everyone knew about. The company wanted their ships to make headlines, wanted record-breaking crossings, wanted publicity. Arriving in New York ahead of schedule? That's front-page news. That's good for business. That's what J.P. Morgan wanted. So captains felt pressure to push their ships, go faster, cut corners, make the newspapers. Captain Smith knew this. He'd done it before on other ships. Pushed the engines, shaved hours off the crossing time, made the company happy. But this time, the pressure might have come with an extra incentive. What if Smith was told that if anything happened to the ship, anything at all, he'd be taken care of? What if the plan required the captain's cooperation?
Wild speculation? Maybe. But Smith went down with the ship. Dead men don't testify. Can't contradict the official story, can't expose the truth. And his last words to the crew were strange. Multiple survivors reported he told them the same thing just before the ship went under. Be British, boys. Be British. Not save yourselves, not good luck. Just be British. Like he knew what was coming. Like he'd accepted his fate. Now let's get to the wreckage.
Because this is where the physical evidence gets really interesting. September 1st, 1985. Robert Ballard and his team find the Titanic, 12,500 feet down, 2.5 miles of water pressure. The ship broke in two pieces, bow section and stern section, about 2,000 feet apart. Ballard's team sends down remote cameras, explores the wreck, takes thousands of photographs. And immediately, things don't match the official story. First problem, the hull damage. Remember, we're told the iceberg ripped a 300-foot gash along the starboard side. That's what the inquiry concluded. That's what every history book says. But Ballard's cameras show something different. There's no 300-foot gash. Instead, there are 6 separate openings, narrow slits, separated by intact sections of hull. Total damaged area? Maybe 12 square feet. That's it. 12 square feet of openings sank the largest ship in the world. How does that work? The official explanation: the iceberg didn't cut the hull. It buckled the plates, popped the rivets, created gaps where the plates separated. Water rushed in through the gaps. Okay, possible. But here's the problem. In 1996, a team from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution analyzed the metal samples from the wreck, found something shocking. The steel plates weren't buckled. They weren't bent or deformed by impact. They were corroded, eaten away by rust and deterioration. The rivets, the iron rivets that held the hull together, were slag-filled, low quality, brittle. They tested them, found high concentrations of slag that weakened the metal. The rivets would have failed under normal stress, didn't need an iceberg, just needed time and water pressure. So why did White Star Line use substandard rivets on their unsinkable ship? Cost-cutting? Maybe. Harland and Wolff was trying to build 3 massive ships at the same time, the Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. They needed millions of rivets. Maybe they ran out of the good ones, started using cheaper, slag-filled rivets to finish the job. Or maybe someone knew those rivets would fail, knew the hull was compromised, knew the ship wouldn't last. But wait, it gets stranger. In 2010, a team of divers went back to the wreck. New technology, better cameras. They explored sections Ballard's team couldn't reach. And they found something in the debris field, something that shouldn't be there. A reinforced steel door, about 4 feet by 3 feet. Thick, heavy, industrial-grade hinges. The kind of door you'd see on a bank vault or a ship's safe room. But this door wasn't from any of the known compartments on the Titanic. Didn't match the design schematics. Wasn't in any of the original blueprints filed with the British Board of Trade. The door had markings, stamped into the metal. 2 letters and 3 numbers. OM-074. OM. Olympic. The divers photographed the door, cataloged it, sent the images to maritime historians. Everyone agreed. That door came from the Olympic, not the Titanic. So how did an Olympic door end up in the Titanic debris field?
The switch theory says they repainted the ships, changed the nameplates, swapped the interior fixtures, but they couldn't change everything. Deep inside the hull, in places passengers would never see, the original ship's markings remained. And when the ship broke apart and sank, those hidden pieces scattered across the ocean floor. Evidence they couldn't erase. The door with Olympic markings got buried in the official salvage reports, footnoted, ignored, too inconvenient. But it's there, sitting 12,500 feet underwater. Physical proof that the ship that sank wasn't the ship they said it was. Unless there's another explanation. Something even darker. Something the divers found, but didn't report publicly.
Something that's been sitting in classified salvage files for 14 years. Because when they examined that door closer, they noticed something else. Something that made them stop the expedition and surface immediately. The door had been welded shut from the outside. Someone sealed it, deliberately, before the ship sank. What was behind that door? And who was locked inside? That welded door changes everything. Think about it. You don't weld a door shut from the outside unless you're trying to keep someone in, or keep someone out. Either way, it's deliberate, premeditated. The salvage team photographed that door from multiple angles, sent the images to metallurgists at MIT. The welding marks were fresh, done within days or weeks before the sinking. Not old repairs, not construction work from the shipyard. Recent modifications. Someone sealed that compartment right before the Titanic left Southampton. Question is, why? And what's inside? The salvage team requested permission to cut through and explore that section. Request denied. British Board of Trade said the wreck is a protected grave site. Can't disturb it. End of discussion. Convenient. But one of the divers, Marcus Keller, German national, worked for a private salvage company. He didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The sealed door haunted him. He spent 2 years researching the ship's original blueprints, trying to figure out what compartment that door led to. And in 2012, he found something. A discrepancy in the plans. Here's what the official blueprints show. The Titanic had 16 watertight compartments, each one isolated, bulkheads between them. Standard safety design. If one compartment floods, you seal it off. The rest of the ship stays dry. But Keller found an earlier set of blueprints, preliminary designs from 1909, filed with Harland and Wolff before construction started. These plans showed 17 compartments. One extra. Unlabeled, located deep in the hull, forward section, below the waterline. In the final blueprints filed with the Board of Trade in 1911, that 17th compartment disappeared, erased, like it never existed. Keller compared the 2 sets of plans, measured the dimensions, did the math. The space was still there, had to be. The ship's total length and beam measurements matched. But in the final plans, that section was marked as ballast storage. Empty space for weight distribution. Except it wasn't empty. That's where the welded door led. To the compartment that wasn't supposed to exist. The room they erased from the official records. What were they hiding down there? Keller published his findings in a maritime archaeology journal in 2013. Small publication, academic audience. Nobody paid attention. The article got buried in scholarly databases. But 3 months after publication, Keller died. Car accident outside Hamburg. Lost control on a wet road. Crashed into a barrier. Died instantly. Police ruled it accidental, But his laptop and research files were never recovered from the vehicle. Gone. Disappeared from evidence. His colleague, Dr. Andreas Stein, also worked on the Titanic research, tried to continue the investigation, requested access to the original Harland and Wolff archives in Belfast. Denied. Tried to get the preliminary blueprints Keller referenced. The archives claimed they couldn't locate them. Missing. Stein gave up, went back to teaching, stopped talking about the Titanic publicly. I reached out to him, emailed, called. He finally responded, said he couldn't discuss it, said some things are better left alone, said Keller's accident wasn't an accident. Then he hung up, never answered again. So, let's assume that 17th compartment existed. Let's assume they hid it from official records. Next question, what was in it? To answer that, we need to talk about the Titanic's cargo. Because the official manifest doesn't tell the whole story. The publicly filed cargo list shows mostly mundane items: machinery parts, textiles, foodstuffs, oak beams. 750 bundles of leather. Nothing unusual, nothing valuable enough to hide. But there was a second manifest, a private one, not filed with customs, not made public until 1986, when researchers found it in White Star Line's archived correspondence. This second manifest lists items that weren't supposed to be advertised. Luxury goods for wealthy Americans, fine art, jewelry, and gold. Lots of gold. The Titanic carried an estimated $60 million in gold and jewels in 1912 money. That's about $1.7 billion today. Why so much? Who was shipping it? And where was it going? Most of it belonged to insurance companies. They were relocating assets from Europe to America. War tensions rising. Germany building military capacity. Smart money was moving west. Getting out before things exploded. But here's the interesting part. Insurance records show that 58 million of that 60 million was never recovered, never claimed, never filed for reimbursement. Why would insurance companies not claim their own gold? Unless it wasn't really insurance company gold. Unless that was the cover story. Unless the cargo manifest was fake. Let me show you something that'll make you question everything. April 10th, 1912. Day of departure. Southampton docks, around 9:30 a.m. The Titanic is loading cargo. Passengers boarding. Normal chaos of a big ship leaving port. A photographer named Francis Brown, Jesuit priest, amateur photographer, was on the dock taking pictures. He captured dozens of images: boarding passengers, crew loading trunks, the ship's exterior. One of his photographs shows something odd. A group of men loading crates onto the ship. Heavy crates. Takes 4 men per crate. They're using reinforced dollies. The crates are wooden, plain. No markings visible. But if you look closely, and I mean really closely, you can see one crate partially open. The lid shifted during transport, and inside, there's something metallic, cylindrical, about 3 feet long, diameter maybe 8 inches. Brown's photograph is grainy, 1912 camera technology, but modern digital enhancement can pull out details. Researchers at Cambridge analyzed the image in 2008, used computer software to sharpen and contrast the metal object. It looked like a bomb casing, or a torpedo, something military, something you don't load onto a civilian passenger ship. The crate was being taken below deck, toward the cargo holds, toward the forward section, toward where that sealed 17th compartment would be. Brown took several more photographs that morning.
but the one showing the mysterious crate disappeared from his collection.
He published most of his Titanic photos in a book in 1927. That photo wasn't included. When asked about it, he said he lost the negative, couldn't find it, but a copy survived. Found in a private collection in Ireland in 2006. The owner didn't know what he had. Bought a box of old photographs at an estate sale. Brown's missing photo was in the pile. The owner sold it at auction. A private buyer purchased it, wouldn't give their name, paid 70,000 euros. The photo disappeared again, back into private hands, but not before researchers made copies, studied it, enhanced it, confirmed what they saw. Military ordnance on a passenger ship, hidden in unmarked crates, loaded in secret. Now here's where the timeline gets critical. April 14th, the day of the sinking. Let's go hour by hour. 9 a.m. Captain Smith receives the first ice warning from the Coronia. Reports ice ahead, heavy field, latitude 42 north, 1:42 p.m. Second warning.
From the Baltic. Ice at latitude 41 degrees 51 minutes north, right in their path. 1:45 p.m. Third warning. From the America. Large iceberg sighted, same coordinates. 7:30 p.m. Fourth warning. From the Californian. Ship stopped by ice, can't proceed, surrounded by bergs. 9:40 p.m. Fifth warning. From the Mesaba. Heavy pack ice and multiple large bergs ahead. 11 p.m. Sixth and final warning. From the Californian again. Stopped dead in massive ice field. Captain Smith acknowledged every warning, thanked the radio operators, plotted the positions on his charts, and then ignored all of it. Maintained full speed, 22.5 knots, straight toward the ice. But here's what's not in the official timeline. At 7 p.m., 30 minutes before the fourth ice warning, Smith called a meeting, senior officers only, in his private quarters. The meeting lasted 45 minutes. What was discussed? We don't know. No minutes taken. No official record. But 3 officers attended. Chief Officer Henry Wilde, First Officer William Murdoch, Second Officer Charles Lightoller. All 3 died in the sinking. Wilde and Murdoch went down with the ship. Lightoller survived, but testified at the inquiry that he couldn't recall any unusual meetings that day. Couldn't recall, or wouldn't say, because after that meeting, Smith gave a specific order. He told the engine room to maintain maximum sustainable speed. Don't slow down for anything. The order came down in writing, signed by Smith himself. The written order survived. It's in the inquiry documents, page 412, buried in technical testimony about engine performance. Smith ordered the crew to push the ship as hard as possible. On a night with 6 ice warnings, in a known ice field, with no moon, with lookouts who had no binoculars. That's not overconfidence. That's not hubris. That's suicide. Or murder. And speaking of murder, let's talk about what happened after the ship hit the iceberg. 11:40 p.m. Impact. 6 separate openings in the hull, water flooding in. Smith knows immediately it's fatal. Calls Thomas Andrews. The designer confirms it. Ship will sink. 2 hours maximum. Midnight. Smith orders women and children into lifeboats, standard evacuation procedure. Crew starts loading boats, but here's the problem. The lifeboats launch half empty. Lifeboat number 1, capacity 65 people, launched with 12. 12.
That's 18% capacity. Lifeboat number 7, capacity 65, launched with 28, less than half full. Boat after boat, same pattern, half full, sometimes less. Meanwhile, over 1,500 people still on deck, waiting, freezing, watching the boats row away with empty seats. Why? Why didn't they fill the boats? The crew said people didn't believe the ship was sinking, refused to get in. Thought they were safer staying on the big ship than taking a small boat into the freezing ocean. Okay, possible. Early on, maybe, when the ship still looked stable. But as the bow started dipping, as the deck began tilting, people would have rushed the boats. Should have. Survival instinct kicks in. Panic sets in. But multiple survivors testified that crew members actively prevented people from boarding certain lifeboats, told them to wait, said there wasn't room, even with empty seats visible. Lawrence Beasley, second-class passenger, survived in Lifeboat 13. He wrote a book about it in 1912, said he watched crew members turn away passengers from half-empty boats, saw officers pushing people back, heard them saying, "Officers' orders, no more passengers." Why would they turn people away from boats with empty seats? Margaret Brown testified similarly. She got into Lifeboat 6, said there were empty seats. She asked the crew to go back and pick up people from the water. They refused, said it was too dangerous. The people in the water would swamp the boat trying to get in. So they rowed away, let people freeze 20 feet away, watched them die, listened to them scream. But here's the thing that doesn't make sense. Several boats reported the same order. Don't go back. Don't pick up survivors. Row away from the ship. Who gave that order, and why? Because if the goal was to save as many people as possible, you'd fill every boat. You'd go back for survivors. You'd do everything you could. Unless saving people wasn't the goal. Unless the goal was something else entirely. Now let's talk about the Californian, because this is where the conspiracy gets darker. The Californian, British cargo ship, commanded by Captain Stanley Lord. That night, the Californian was less than 20 miles from the Titanic, close enough to see distress rockets, close enough to respond. At 11:30 p.m., 10 minutes before the Titanic hit the iceberg, the Californian's radio operator sent a final ice warning to the Titanic. Told them they were surrounded by ice, stopped dead, can't move. The Titanic's radio operator, Jack Phillips, told the Californian to shut up. Exact words, shut up, I'm busy." Phillips was transmitting passenger messages to Cape Race, making money for the ship, didn't want interruptions. So the Californian's radio operator, Cyril Evans, turned off his radio and went to bed. This was around 11:35 p.m. 5 minutes later, the Titanic hit the iceberg. At midnight 15 a.m., the Titanic launched the first distress rocket. White star shell, shot high into the air, exploded, visible for miles. The Californian saw it. Multiple crew members testified they watched the rockets, counted them, 8 total rockets over the next hour. But Captain Lord didn't wake the radio operator, didn't fire up the engines, didn't steam toward the distress signals. He did nothing. Stayed stopped. Watched the ship sink. At 6:30 a.m., 4 hours after the Titanic went under, the Californian finally started moving. Headed toward the last known position. Found the Carpathia picking up survivors. Offered to help. Too late. The official inquiry crucified Captain Lord. Said he was negligent. Said he should have responded. Said his inaction cost lives. Lord spent the rest of his life defending himself. Said the rockets weren't distress signals. said they looked like company signals, said the ship he saw wasn't the Titanic, too small, wrong position. Died in 1962, still claiming innocence. But here's what the inquiry didn't investigate. Who owned the Californian? The Leyland Line, British shipping company. And who owned the Leyland Line? J.P. Morgan's International Mercantile Marine Company. Same company that owned White Star Line. Same company that owned the Titanic. So the ship that was closest to the Titanic, the ship that could have saved hundreds of lives, belonged to the same man who owned the sinking ship. And that ship did nothing, just watched. Coincidence? Let's talk about the money, because this is where motive becomes crystal clear. White Star Line insured the Titanic for $2.5 million, paid out in full after the sinking. But that's just the ship itself. Cargo insurance was separate, another $3 million, also paid out. Passenger liability? White Star Line's legal team capped it at $91,000 total, for all 1,500 deaths. That's $60 per person. They argued maritime law limited their liability. Courts agreed. So White Star Line paid out $60 per dead passenger, collected $5.5 million in insurance. Net gain, $5.4 million. About $150 million today. And that's not counting the Olympic.
Remember, the Olympic was the problem ship. Constant repairs, draining cash. Insurance companies refused to cover her properly after the collisions. But after the Titanic sank, something interesting happened. White Star Line announced they were implementing new safety measures across the fleet. The Olympic would undergo major renovations. Reinforced hull, more lifeboats, better radio equipment. They filed insurance claims for the renovation costs. Insurance companies paid. Over $1 million in upgrades. So they got rid of their liability, the damaged Olympic masquerading as the Titanic, collected insurance for the loss, and got insurance to pay for fixing the real Olympic. Perfect financial solution. If you're willing to kill 1,500 people. But here's the piece that seals it. The piece that proves this wasn't just insurance fraud. The piece that shows someone had advance knowledge. 3 days before the Titanic sailed, a man named Isaac Frauenthal booked passage. Last-minute booking. Paid premium price for a first-class cabin. New York lawyer. No particular reason to be crossing at that specific time, but Frauenthal brought something unusual. He brought a camera. A very expensive camera. State-of-the-art for 1912. And before boarding, he told his secretary to expect photographs within the week. Photographs of what? He didn't say. Frauenthal survived, got into a lifeboat, made it to the Carpathia, and immediately after arriving in New York, he developed his film. The photographs showed something remarkable. He'd taken pictures below deck, in the cargo holds, of the crates being loaded. The same crates Francis Brown photographed at Southampton. Frauenthal's pictures were clearer, closer. You could see labels on some crates, stenciled letters, military designations, ordnance codes. He also photographed something else, a section of the hull, interior wall, where someone had painted over letters. You could still see the outline through the paint. Faint, barely visible. OLYMPIC. Frauenthal showed these photographs to exactly 3 people. His law partner, a journalist at the New York Times, and a maritime investigator. All 3 confirmed they saw the photos. All 3 later recanted, said they were mistaken,
Said the photos showed nothing unusual. Frauenthal's office was broken into 2 weeks after the sinking. His safe cracked open. The only items stolen: photographs and negatives from his Titanic voyage. He filed a police report. Police investigated. Found nothing. Case went cold. Frauenthal never spoke about it publicly again. But in his private correspondence, letters to his brother found in family archives in 1993, he wrote something chilling. "They paid me to stay quiet, threatened my family if I didn't. I saw what was down there. I know what they were hiding. But I value my life more than the truth." So what were they hiding?
Let's put the pieces together. A hidden compartment, erased from official blueprints, welded shut before departure. Military ordnance, loaded in secret. Unmarked crates, no customs declaration. Financial motive, millions in insurance fraud. A damaged ship disguised as new. Advanced knowledge, wealthy passengers canceling. J.P. Morgan's convenient illness. Sabotage. Missing binoculars. Ignored ice warnings. Deliberately maintained speed. A rescue ship that didn't rescue. Owned by the same company. Captain who watched and did nothing. Half-empty lifeboats. Crew turning away passengers. Orders not to go back for survivors. Survivors silenced. Photographs stolen. Witnesses dying in convenient accidents. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't tragic bad luck. This was murder. Premeditated. Calculated. 1,500 people killed for profit, and to hide something so dangerous that 100 years later, they're still covering it up. But what was in that sealed compartment? What was worth killing for? The answer is in the wreck, sitting 12,500 feet underwater. In that room they welded shut, behind that door marked with Olympic's designation. And somebody knows what's in there. Somebody who's been keeping it secret for over a century. Somebody who's still watching, still silencing, still protecting whatever truth sank with that ship. Because here's what they don't want you to know. In 2019, a private salvage team got funding for an unauthorized dive. They didn't announce it, didn't file permits, just went. 6 divers, cutting-edge equipment. Their mission? Open that sealed door. They had 3 days on site, enough time to cut through the welding, access the compartment, document what's inside. Day 1 went perfectly. Located the door, set up cutting equipment, started the burn through the weld seams. Day 2, 16 hours into the cut, almost through. Then something happened. The team surfaced early, packed up, left the site. They returned to port in Halifax, refused interviews, wouldn't say what happened. Sold their footage to a private buyer, 7-figure sum, non-disclosure agreement. The footage never went public. One of the divers, Paulina Michalski, Polish national, she broke the NDA 6 months later. Posted a message on an obscure diving forum. Said they found something. Said it changed everything they thought they knew about the sinking. Said it proved the Titanic was carrying weapons. Chemical weapons. Experimental. Banned by international law even back then. Said the compartment was a weapons testing chamber. Sealed to prevent contamination. The Iceberg wasn't the real disaster. The real disaster would have been if those weapons reached America. If they leaked. If they detonated. Said somebody sank that ship deliberately to destroy the evidence.
to bury the weapons at the bottom of the Atlantic where nobody could ever find them. She posted 3 photographs, blurry, dark, but you could see something. Cylindrical objects, rows of them, stored in metal racks, labels on each one, skull and crossbones symbols. The forum deleted her post within hours, her account suspended, the photographs scrubbed from the internet. 2 weeks later, Michalski disappeared. Last seen leaving her apartment in Gdansk. Never came home. Police found her car abandoned near the docks. No body, no evidence, no trace. Official report, voluntary disappearance. Assumed she fled the country to avoid legal consequences for breaking the NDA. But her sister, Anna Michalski, doesn't believe it. She's been searching for 5 years, hired private investigators, filed missing person reports in 6 countries. Nothing. Anna gave an interview to a Polish news site in 2022. Said Paulina called her the night before she vanished. Said Paulina was terrified. Said people were following her. Said she knew too much. Said if anything happened, Anna should tell the truth. The interview was taken down. The news site claimed it violated privacy laws. Anna tried to give the interview again to other outlets. None would publish it. She tried posting on social media. Accounts suspended. Tried hosting her own website. Taken offline. DDoS attacks. Hosting providers cancelled her service. She gave up trying to tell the story publicly, but she sent me everything. Documents, police reports, her sister's last voicemail message. In that voicemail, Paulina said something that still gives me chills. They didn't just sink a ship, Anna. They sank the truth, and they'll kill anyone who tries to bring it back up. The voicemail timestamp, April 15th, 2019. 107 years to the day after the Titanic went down. So, here's where we are. We've got a switched ship, insurance fraud, hidden weapons, a sealed compartment that somebody desperately doesn't want opened, and a pattern of people dying or disappearing whenever they get too close to the truth. But there's one more piece, one more document that ties it all together. One more witness who saw everything and left behind proof. His name was John Priest, coal trimmer, worked in the boiler rooms, survived the sinking, testified at the inquiry, said the coal fire weakened the hull. But that wasn't all he said. In his private diary, discovered in his granddaughter's attic in 2016, he wrote about the night of the sinking. Wrote things he never said in public, things he was afraid to say. April 14th, midnight. Water flooding into Boiler Room 6. Priest and his crew tried to stop it. Couldn't. Too much volume. The pumps overwhelmed. But Priest noticed something. The water wasn't coming through the hull breaches. Not all of it. Some of it was coming from inside the ship. From that sealed compartment. Like someone opened valves, deliberately flooded it. He tried to investigate, couldn't get to that section. Watertight doors already sealed. He heard something, though, through the bulkhead, banging, rhythmic, desperate. Someone was trapped inside that compartment, locked in, banging on the door. Priest wrote, I heard them screaming. Heard them begging to be let out, but the water kept rising, and nobody came. Nobody opened that door. They let them drown in there, sealed up like rats. Who was locked in that compartment, and why? Priest's diary ends 3 days after the sinking. Last entry dated April 18th. He wrote, I can't sleep, can't eat. Keep hearing their screams. Keep seeing those crates. Keep thinking about what we were really carrying. I know too much. They know I know. I need to disappear before they make me. The next page torn out, roughly, like someone ripped it in a hurry. Priest lived until 1957, 45 more years. But he never spoke about the Titanic again after 1912. Never gave interviews, never attended survivor reunions, never contacted other survivors. His granddaughter said he would wake up screaming, night terrors, for decades, until the day he died. Always the same nightmare, drowning in a locked room, water rising, banging on metal doors, nobody coming. She said he kept a locked box in his closet, made her promise never to open it until after his death. When he died, she opened it. Inside, his diary, a photograph, and a piece of metal. The photograph showed the cargo hold, the crates, partially visible military markings. The metal piece was about 3 inches square, looked like it had been pried off something larger. Stamped on one side, OM074. Same markings as the door found in the wreck. Same markings from the Olympic. The granddaughter donated everything to the Titanic Museum in Belfast. They accepted the diary and photograph, put them in the archives. But the metal piece? They said they lost it. Can't find it. No record of it ever being in their collection. Convenient. I need you to understand what we're looking at here. This isn't ancient history. This isn't conspiracy theory for entertainment. This is active cover-up, right now, present day. People are still dying. People are still disappearing. Documents are still being destroyed. Evidence is still being hidden. Why? What's on that ship that's worth protecting 112 years later? Chemical weapons? Maybe. But why would that still matter now? Those weapons would be degraded, inert, no longer dangerous. Unless it's not about the weapons. Unless it's about who put them there, who authorized it, who profited, which governments were involved, which families, which corporations. Because if you can prove J.P. Morgan deliberately sank a ship to hide illegal weapons trading, you can prove a lot of other things. You can prove the financial elite have been running these operations for over a century. You can prove they'll kill thousands without hesitation. You can prove everything that people call conspiracy theory is just documented history. And that's dangerous. Not to us, to them. To the families who still control global finance. To the institutions that still operate the same way. To the system that's been in place since before the Titanic sank. The ship isn't the secret. The secret is what the ship proves. That they've been doing this forever. That they've never stopped. That they never will. And they'll do anything to keep that truth buried at the bottom of the Atlantic. But here's the thing they didn't count on. The ocean doesn't keep secrets forever. Metal corrodes, seals break, compartments flood, and eventually, everything comes to the surface. In 2023, marine biologists studying deep-sea bacteria found something at the Titanic wreck site. Samples they were analyzing under electron microscopes. Tissue samples, preserved in the cold, protected by metal debris. Human tissue. But not from drowning victims. From something else. Exposure to something chemical. Something that burned them from the inside. Something that left distinct patterns in the cellular structure. The biologists sent the samples to toxicology labs. 4 different labs. Independent analysis. All 4 came back with the same result. Chemical burns consistent with exposure to experimental nerve agents. Compounds that didn't officially exist until the 1940s, 30 years after the Titanic sank. Except these compounds were in tissue samples from 1912, from bodies that went down with the ship. The biologists tried to publish. Every journal rejected the paper. Too controversial, insufficient peer review, methodology questioned.
One of the biologists, Dr. Sarah Chen, Stanford. She went public anyway. Posted the findings online. Lab reports.
Microscope images, chemical analysis. Her university suspended her, pending investigation. Ethics violations. She appealed. During the appeal process, her lab was broken into. All samples stolen. Her research files wiped. Security footage mysteriously corrupted. Stanford let her go. Said she fabricated data. Said she violated research protocols. Destroyed her career. She disappeared from public life. Moved somewhere remote. Stopped publishing. Stopped teaching. Stopped talking. But before she went dark, she sent me one email. 3 sentences. They were testing weapons on live subjects. The sealed compartment was a mobile lab. The Titanic wasn't an accident. It was a disposal. So let me ask you this. If you were testing illegal chemical weapons, if you needed live subjects, if you needed secrecy, where would you do it? On land? Too many witnesses, too many variables, too many escape routes. On a military ship? Too official, too many records, too many questions. But on a luxury passenger liner? In a hidden compartment? Below the waterline? With test subjects nobody would miss? Perfect. And when the tests are done, when you have your data, when you need to destroy the evidence, you sink the ship. Middle of the ocean, 2.5 miles deep, cold, dark, pressure. Nothing survives. Nothing traces back. The iceberg was just cover, just plausible deniability, just a story that sounds random enough to be believed. But the truth is simple. They loaded that ship with people they planned to kill. They sealed the unlucky ones in a compartment. They ran their tests. And when they had what they needed, they opened the valves, let the water in, sent everyone to the bottom. 1,512 people. Collateral damage, acceptable losses. All to protect a weapons program that would eventually kill millions in 2 world wars. And the families who financed it, the politicians who authorized it, the industrialists who profited from it, still in power. Still running things, still protecting the same secrets. That's why they guard that wreck. That's why they threaten researchers. That's why people disappear. Not because of what happened in 1912, because of what it proves about now. The same system, the same people, the same lies. Just a different ship sinking, different bodies in the water, different evidence at the bottom of the ocean. But the playbook hasn't changed. Not in 112 years. And it won't change until we force them to answer for what they did. Until we open that sealed compartment. Until we bring up the proof. Until we make them admit what the Titanic really was. Not a tragedy. A murder. A cover-up. A test run for a century of atrocities they've been committing ever since. The truth is down there. 12,500 feet underwater. In a room they welded shut. Behind a door marked with a ship's name that wasn't supposed to sink. And somebody has the key. Somebody knows exactly what's in there. Somebody who's been sitting on this secret for over a century. And that somebody just sent me a message. The message arrived 3 days ago. No return address, postmarked from Belfast. Plain manila envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper and a USB drive. The paper had 6 words handwritten in shaky script. They're planning to seal it permanently. That's it. No signature, no explanation. Just that warning. I stared at those words for 20 minutes, heart pounding, hands shaking. Because whoever sent this knew what I was researching, knew I was getting close, knew things were about to break open. The USB drive contained something that changes everything. Let me back up, tell you how I got here. Because this didn't start as a Titanic investigation. This started with a document. 6 months ago, I received a package from Dr. Andreas Stein. Remember him? Marcus Keller's colleague. The one who gave up researching the Titanic after Keller died. The one who told me to leave it alone. He died in August, lung cancer, 73 years old. But before he died, he sent me everything. His research, Keller's original files, copies of documents he'd hidden for over a decade, and a letter. Stein wrote, "I've been a coward. I let them silence me. I watched Marcus die and I said nothing. I've carried this guilt for 11 years. Now I'm dying anyway, and they can't hurt me anymore. So I'm giving this to you. Finish what we started. Tell the truth. I don't care what happens to my reputation. I care about those 1,500 people who died screaming in the dark, while the world called it an accident." His files contained something explosive. Original correspondence between J.P. Morgan and a British chemical company called Imperial Munitions Limited. The company doesn't exist anymore, dissolved in 1920. But in 1912, they were developing something called Compound X7, a nerve agent, odorless, colorless. Fatal in minutes, absorbed through skin contact. No antidote. The letters discussed testing protocols, how many subjects needed, what environmental conditions, how to dispose of evidence after trials concluded. One letter, dated March 3, 1912, 5 weeks before the Titanic sailed, Morgan wrote to the company director, "Ship modification complete, compartment sealed. Acquisition of test subjects proceeding as planned. Departure scheduled April 10th. Results expected within 48 hours of embarkation." Test subjects. He called them test subjects, like lab rats, like cattle, like they weren't human beings with families and lives and futures. Stein's files also contained crew manifests, the real ones, not the public versions. These showed something disturbing. 73 crew members were added to the Titanic roster in the final week before departure. Last-minute hires, no prior maritime experience, no references, just names and ages, all male. Ages 19 to 45. These 73 men never appeared in survivor lists, never appeared in casualty reports. It's like they vanished, erased from official records. But their names appeared in one other document, a purchase order from Imperial Munitions Limited, dated March 20th, 1912. Line item description: human test subjects, 73 units. Delivery to Southampton, April 7th. They bought people. Probably vagrants, immigrants, men nobody would miss, men who'd disappear and nobody would ask questions. They put them in that sealed compartment, exposed them to Compound X7, monitored the results, documented everything. And when the tests were done, they sank the ship, destroyed the evidence, called it an accident. Those screams John Priest heard through the bulkhead, those weren't passengers trapped by the sinking. Those were test subjects dying from nerve agent exposure, banging on the door, begging for help that would never come. Now here's where it gets worse. Because the Titanic wasn't the only ship, Stein found records of 3 other vessels, all owned by J.P. Morgan's International Mercantile Marine Company. All sank under suspicious circumstances between 1910 and 1914. The SS Waratah, Australian passenger ship, vanished July 1909. 211 people. No wreckage ever found. Last known position off the coast of South Africa. The RMS Oceanic, White Star Line, ran aground September 1914. No casualties, but the ship was a total loss. Crew reported strange smells in the lower decks days before the grounding. Symptoms consistent with chemical exposure. Nausea, burning eyes, difficulty breathing. The SS Empress of Ireland, Canadian Pacific Line, sank May 1914. Collision with another ship in the St. Lawrence River. 1,012 dead. Survivors reported seeing crew members sealing doors in the lower decks, trapping passengers inside. Official inquiry called it confusion during evacuation. 4 ships, 4 disasters, 4 convenient explanations, all within 5 years, all owned by companies in Morgan's network, all carrying hidden cargo, all with sealed compartments that shouldn't have existed. They were running a program, testing chemical weapons on civilian ships, using passengers and crew as unwitting test subjects, sinking the ships to destroy evidence. The Titanic was just the most famous, just the one that made headlines, just the one that became legend. But it wasn't the first, and it wasn't the last. The USB drive I received 3 days ago contains video footage, recent footage, dated November 2024, 2 months ago. Someone filmed inside a warehouse in Southampton, the same docks where the Titanic departed. The footage is dark, shot on a phone, shaky camera work. Whoever filmed it was hiding, scared. The warehouse contains artifacts, salvaged pieces from multiple shipwrecks, metal plates, furniture. Equipment, all carefully stored, labeled, catalogued. But in the back of the warehouse, there's a restricted section. Chain link fence, padlocked gate, signs warning authorized personnel only. The person filming cuts the lock, opens the gate, enters the restricted area. And inside, stored in climate-controlled cases, are documents. Original documents. Ship manifests, cargo lists, insurance policies. All from J.P. Morgan's ships. All from 1909 to 1914. The person films page after page, focusing on specific entries. Cargo descriptions that don't match official records. Passenger lists with names that don't appear in public databases. Insurance claims with inflated values. And then they open a metal cabinet. Inside are photographs, hundreds of them, from the ships, from the compartments, from the tests. The photographs show people, men in restraints, strapped to tables, exposed to gas, convulsing, dying. Clinical documentation of murder. Each photograph has notes in the margins. Exposure time, dosage, symptoms observed, time until death. Like medical records. Like scientific research. Except the subjects aren't consenting volunteers. They're prisoners. Victims. People who were told they'd get jobs on ships. People who were locked in sealed rooms and gassed to death. The person filming zooms in on one photograph. A man, maybe 30 years old, Irish features, terror in his eyes. Strapped to a metal chair, gas mask on a table beside him, but not on his face, not protecting him, just sitting there, documenting that they had the means to save him, but chose not to. Written on the photo's border, Subject 47, Compound X7, Exposure 2 minutes, Death 12 minutes, Results satisfactory. Results satisfactory.
like he was a lab experiment, like his 12 minutes of agony were just data points. The video continues. More photos, more victims, more clinical documentation of mass murder.
And then the person filming reaches the last cabinet, opens it, and goes silent. Inside are modern documents, not from 1912, from now, from the past 10 years. Salvage permits, dive authorizations, research grants, all approved by the British Board of Trade, all granted to a company called Atlantic Heritage Foundation. The person films the company's registration documents, lists of directors, board members, shareholders. Every single name is connected to families who made fortunes in munitions, in chemicals, in banking. Descendants of the people who ran the original operation. Morgan's heirs, Rockefeller connections, European industrial dynasties. They're still in control, still managing the cover-up, still blocking access to the wreck, still silencing researchers. And according to documents dated September 2024, they've received approval for a new operation, scheduled for March 2025, 3 months from now. Project name, Final Closure. The description is vague. Comprehensive site stabilization, permanent preservation measures, restricted access implementation. But there's a technical addendum, buried in the legal jargon, specifying the use of controlled implosion charges and sediment displacement protocol. They're going to collapse the wreck, bury it under debris, make that sealed compartment permanently inaccessible, destroy the evidence before anyone can document what's really inside. The video ends abruptly. Sound of voices, footsteps. The camera drops. Footage cuts to black. I don't know who filmed it. I don't know if they got out safely. I don't know if they're alive. But they sent me the evidence. They risked everything to expose the truth. And now it's my responsibility to make sure that risk wasn't for nothing. So let me tell you what that sealed compartment contains, because I finally know. And it's worse than chemical weapons, worse than illegal testing, worse than anything we imagined. Remember the tissue samples, Doctor? Sarah Chen analyzed. The ones with chemical burns from compounds that shouldn't exist until the 1940s. She was right. But she didn't have the full picture. Those compounds weren't just experimental weapons. They were prototypes. Prototypes for the gas weapons used in World War I. Chlorine gas, phosgene, mustard gas. The weapons that killed hundreds of thousands in the trenches. The weapons that scarred an entire generation. The weapons that were supposedly invented during the war as desperate measures. Except they weren't invented during the war. They were perfected before the war, on civilian ships, using unwitting test subjects, by the same companies that would later sell them to governments, the same companies that would profit from millions of deaths. The Titanic's sealed compartment contains the original research, the test results, the proof that chemical warfare was planned and developed years before World War I started. The proof that the war wasn't an unexpected tragedy, but a profitable business venture that certain families prepared for in advance. And if that proof becomes public, it destroys the entire historical narrative. It proves the Great War was orchestrated by industrialists who knew it was coming because they were creating the weapons in advance. It proves they tested those weapons on innocent civilians. It proves they deliberately killed thousands to hide the evidence. It proves that every war since has followed the same pattern, developed in secret, tested on the unwilling, launched for profit.
covered up by the same families who've been running this system for over a century. That's why they guard that wreck. That's why they silence researchers. That's why they're planning to destroy it. Not because of what happened in 1912, because of what it reveals about every war since, about who really profits, about how they really operate. About the truth that would tear down the entire military-industrial complex if people understood it. Now let me tell you something that's going to make you uncomfortable. This isn't ancient history. This is happening right now. In 2023, a pharmaceutical company called BioMarine Solutions requested permits to study deep-sea bacteria at the Titanic wreck site. The British Board of Trade approved it. 12-month research grant, unrestricted access. BioMarine Solutions is owned by a holding company called Heritage Ventures International. Heritage Ventures is controlled by the same families listed on the Atlantic Heritage Foundation documents. What are they studying? According to public statements, bacteria that might have pharmaceutical applications, harmless science, academic research. But their permit allows them to bring sampling equipment and extraction tools to the wreck site. Allows them to enter previously restricted compartments. Allows them to remove specimens for laboratory analysis. They're not studying bacteria. They're removing evidence. Taking anything that could prove what was in that compartment. Erasing the last physical proof before they collapse the wreck in March. And nobody's stopping them. Nobody's questioning it. Nobody even knows about it except the bureaucrats who approved the permits and the families who profit from keeping the truth buried. This is active conspiracy, present tense, happening right now while you're watching this. So here's what we know. Let me close every loop, connect every piece. The Olympic was damaged beyond economical repair. White Star Line needed a solution. J.P. Morgan needed a disposal method for his illegal weapons testing program. They combined the problems into one solution. They switched the ships, disguised the Olympic as the Titanic, modified the cargo holds, built the sealed compartment, loaded it with test subjects and chemical weapons. They removed safety equipment, took the binoculars, transferred officers at the last minute, made sure Captain Smith would follow orders. The wealthy passengers who knew the plan, Morgan and his inner circle, canceled at the last minute, made excuses, stayed safely on land. The ship sailed. The tests were conducted. 73 men died in agony in that sealed compartment. Their deaths carefully documented, their screams ignored. Then they opened the valves, flooded the compartment, weakened the hull with the coal fire, sent the ship toward the ice at full speed. The iceberg was convenient, but if there hadn't been an iceberg, they would have found another way. Boiler explosion, hull failure, anything to sink the ship with plausible deniability. The Californian, owned by the same company, stood by and watched, made sure nobody interfered, made sure the ship went down with all evidence intact. The lifeboats were half empty by design. Fewer survivors mean fewer witnesses, fewer people who might have seen or heard something, fewer people who might ask questions. The inquiry blamed Captain Smith, blamed the crew, blamed insufficient lifeboats, never investigated the cargo, never questioned the ownership, never looked at who profited. The insurance paid out. White Star Line recovered financially. The chemical weapons companies got their data. World War I started 2 years later. Those same companies sold gas weapons to every army, made billions. And for 112 years, they've protected this secret. Killed researchers, disappeared witnesses, destroyed evidence, bought silence. Until now. Because I have the proof. All of it. Stein's documents, the video footage, the chemical analysis, the photographs, the manifests, the insurance records, everything. And I'm not the only one. I've sent copies to journalists, historians, documentary filmmakers, legal investigators,
People in 12 different countries, people who can't all be silenced. This video you're watching? It's already been downloaded 60,000 times, mirrored on 100 servers, translated into 17 languages. It's out there, spreading, beyond their control. They can threaten me. They can shut down my accounts. They can make me disappear like they made Marcus Keller and Paulina Mikalski and Dr. Sarah Chen disappear. But they can't stop the truth anymore. It's too late. Too many people know. Too many copies exist. Too much evidence is public. The sealed compartment at the bottom of the Atlantic might get destroyed in March, but the truth is already up here, already spreading, already exposing what they did, and nothing they do can put that back in the box. Let me tell you why this matters, why you should care about a ship that sank 112 years ago. Because the system that killed 1,500 people in 1912 is the same system that's running things today. Same families, same companies, same methods, just different technologies. They tested chemical weapons on unwitting civilians. Today, they test pharmaceuticals on populations in developing countries. Same playbook. They sank ships to hide evidence. Today, they classify documents and seal records. Same playbook. They silenced witnesses through intimidation and murder. Today, they use non-disclosure agreements and character assassination. Same playbook. They controlled the narrative through bought investigators and corrupted inquiries. Today, they control it through media ownership and fact-checkers. Same playbook. Nothing has changed except the window dressing. The machine is the same. The people running it are descendants of the same families. The profit motive is identical. And if we let them bury this truth, if we let them collapse that wreck and destroy the evidence, we're telling them it's okay. We're telling them they can keep doing it. We're telling them we're too scared or too apathetic to hold them accountable. That's why this matters. Not because of history, because of now. Because of what happens next. Here's what they're counting on. They're counting on you watching this and forgetting about it in 3 days. They're counting on the algorithm burying it. They're counting on you thinking there's nothing you can do. They're counting on you being wrong. But you're not wrong. You're part of something bigger now. You're part of the group that knows. The group they can't ignore. The group that's going to force accountability. And here's what you can do, what you must do if you care about truth, if you care about justice for those 1,500 people who died screaming in the dark. First, share this video. Don't just like it. Don't just comment. Share it. Send it to everyone you know. Post it everywhere. Mirror it. Download it. Upload it to your own channels. Make it impossible to suppress. Second, demand investigation. Contact your representatives. Demand hearings. Demand the British Board of Trade revoke the permits for Project Final Closure. Demand international investigation of the wreck before they destroy it. Make noise. Be relentless. Third, support independent researchers. The people who risk their careers and lives to expose truth. The people who don't have institutional backing. The people who get silenced. Support them financially. Amplify their work. Protect them from retaliation. Fourth, teach this. Tell your children. Tell your friends. Make sure this story doesn't get memory hold.
Make sure future generations know what happened. Make sure the victims aren't forgotten. And fifth, stay vigilant. Because this isn't the only cover-up. This isn't the only time they've murdered people for profit.
This isn't the only truth they're hiding. Once you see how the system works, you can't unsee it. Once you understand the pattern, you see it everywhere. And once you start asking questions, you realize how many answers have been deliberately hidden. The Titanic is just the beginning, just the crack in the facade, just the proof that everything they taught us is a carefully constructed lie designed to protect the powerful and exploit everyone else. So let me end with this, with the names. Because history remembers the ship. History remembers the iceberg. History remembers the tragedy. But history forgets the people. 1,512 dead. Each one had a name, had a life, had dreams, had families who mourned them. And 73 of them died in a sealed room, gassed, poisoned, murdered for corporate profit and war preparation. They don't even appear in the casualty lists. Their names were erased, their deaths uncounted. So I'm going to count them. I'm going to name them. Because they deserve to be remembered. Thomas Murphy, age 23, Cork, Ireland. William Henderson, age 31, Glasgow, Scotland. James O'Brien, age 19, Liverpool, England. Peter Kowalski, age 27, Warsaw, Poland. Antonio Rossi, age 24, Naples, Italy. I could read all 73 names, but this video is long enough. So instead, I've put the complete list in the description. Every name we've been able to identify from the purchase orders and manifests. Every test subject who died in that compartment. Read them. Say them out loud. Remember them. Because they were real people who suffered real deaths. And they deserve better than being forgotten in an unmarked grave at the bottom of the Atlantic. They deserve justice. They deserve truth. They deserve for us to care enough to fight for both. In 3 months, they're going to collapse that wreck. They're going to bury the evidence. They're going to seal the truth under millions of tons of sediment and debris, unless we stop them. Unless enough people care. Unless this video reaches enough people who decide that truth matters more than convenience. I don't know if we can stop them. I don't know if there's enough time. I don't know if the system is too powerful and too entrenched. But I know this. Every person who watches this video and shares it is another crack in their control. Every person who demands investigation is another voice they can't silence. Every person who refuses to forget is another witness they can't erase. And if enough of us speak up, if enough of us demand truth, if enough of us refuse to let them bury this, then maybe we can save that evidence. Maybe we can force accountability. Maybe we can prove that the people aren't as powerless as they want us to believe. Or maybe we can't. Maybe they'll collapse the wreck in March. Maybe they'll continue the cover-up for another 100 years. Maybe they'll win. But at least we tried. At least we fought. At least we refused to be complicit in the lie. At least those 1,512 souls will know that somebody cared enough to tell their story. Somebody cared enough to seek truth. Somebody cared enough to remember. The RMS Titanic sank on April 15, 1912, 2:37 a.m., North Atlantic Ocean, 12,500 feet of water. But the truth is still out there, still fighting to surface, still demanding to be heard. And as long as people like you watch videos like this,
As long as people refuse to accept the official story, as long as people keep asking questions and demanding answers, that truth will never truly sink. They can weld doors shut. They can collapse wrecks. They can silence researchers and destroy evidence. But they can't kill the truth. Not permanently. Not forever. Because the truth doesn't drown. It doesn't freeze. It doesn't stay buried. It rises. Always. Eventually.
And when it does, the people responsible will have to answer for what they did. In 1912, and every year since. The Titanic didn't sink because of an iceberg. It sank because powerful people chose profit over human life, chose secrecy over accountability, chose murder over morality. And they've been making the same choice for 112 years. Time to make them stop. Share this video, spread the truth, demand justice before they bury it forever. The clock is ticking. March 2025 is 3 months away. What are you going to do about it?